Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the stars drift past the main viewing screen. 3,000 years had passed since the last human war, and Jake had never seen a real battle in his 42 years of life. Neither had his father or his grandfather or anyone else alive today. The ship moved through space at a steady pace, its engines humming quietly. Jake's crew of 30 people worked at their stations, mapping new star systems and looking for planets that might support life. This was their job now. Exploration, not fighting. Discovery, not destruction. "Captain, we're getting some interesting readings from the Vega system," said Lieutenant Ben Parker from his position at the science station. Ben was 28 years old and had spent his entire career studying peaceful alien cultures. War was something he had only read about in history books. Jake walked over to look at Ben's screen. The display showed energy patterns that looked different from anything they had seen before. "What do you think it is?" "Could be a new type of star formation," Ben replied, adjusting the sensors. "Or maybe some kind of natural space phenomenon. The energy levels are really high, but they're not matching any patterns in our database." "Doctor?" Lisa Campbell looked up from her own workstation, where she had been cataloging samples from their last planetary survey. Lisa was the ship's expert on alien life, and she had studied over 50 different species during her career. All of them had been peaceful. All of them had been friendly. The idea that any alien species might be hostile was completely foreign to her thinking. "It could be biological," Lisa suggested. "Some of the energy creatures we've discovered put out massive readings like that. Remember the plasma jellyfish near Alpha Centauri?" Jake nodded. Those creatures had been beautiful to watch, floating through space like living auroras. They had been completely harmless, feeding on solar radiation and cosmic dust. Every alien species humanity had met in the past 3,000 years had been like that. Different, fascinating, but never dangerous. The New Horizon was one of 800 exploration ships that traveled through human space. Each ship had a crew trained in science, diplomacy, and peaceful contact procedures. None of them carried weapons. Why would they? There had been no need for weapons in longer than most civilizations had existed. Human space now covered 847 star systems. Billions of people lived on hundreds of worlds, all connected by quantum communication networks that allowed instant contact across vast distances. Trade ships moved constantly between systems, carrying goods and passengers. Children grew up, learning about dozens of alien cultures, all of them friendly neighbors. Earth itself had become a garden world. Only 2 billion people lived there now, having learned that smaller populations meant better lives for everyone. The oceans were clean, the forests were healthy, and extinct animals had been brought back to life through advanced genetic science. Wars were things that happened in museums. "Captain, I'm picking up more of those energy signatures," Ben reported. "They're getting stronger, and they seem to be moving in our direction." Jake felt curious rather than worried. New discoveries were always exciting. "How fast are they moving?" "Hard to tell exactly, but they seem to be traveling faster than light. Could be ships using some kind of drive system we haven't seen before." Dr. Campbell stood up and walked over to join them. "If they are ships, they might be from one of the unexplored regions near the galactic core. We've always wondered what was out there." The galactic core was a mysterious place. Human exploration had spread in all directions from Earth, but they had never traveled that far into the center of the galaxy. The radiation levels were higher there, and the density of stars made navigation difficult. Most human scientists assumed that if any civilizations existed in that region, they would eventually make contact when they were ready. "Should we send a greeting message?" Ben asked. "Standard first contact protocols?" Jake considered this. First, contact with new alien species was always handled carefully. Humanity had developed detailed procedures over the centuries for approaching unknown cultures. The key was to be respectful, patient, and non-threatening. Every previous contact had gone smoothly using these methods. Not yet, Jake decided. Let's gather more information first. We don't want to interrupt whatever they're doing if they're busy with something important. The bridge was quiet except for the soft sounds of the ship's systems. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, unchanged by the presence of humans or anyone else. Space was vast and mostly empty, filled with wonders that took lifetimes to understand. Lieutenant Sarah Davis, the ship's communications officer, looked up from her station. Sarah was young, only 25, and this was her first deep space assignment. She had grown up on Mars in one of the peaceful colony cities where children learned about cooperation and shared resources from an early age. "Captain, I'm detecting some kind of transmission coming from those energy signatures," Sarah reported. "It's not in any language our computers recognize, but it's definitely artificial. Someone or something is trying to communicate." Jake felt a familiar excitement. First contact with a new species was always a historic moment. Every human child learned about the great meetings with the Centaurians, the Vegan Council, and the Crystal Builders of Rigel. Each contact had led to new friendships and new knowledge. "Can you clean up the signal?" Jake asked. Sarah worked at her controls, adjusting frequencies and filtering out background noise. "I'm getting something now. The computer is trying to translate it, but it's taking time. The language structure is completely different from anything we've encountered before." The bridge crew gathered around Sarah's station, watching as symbols and text scrolled across her screen. Translation was usually quick with human computers, but some languages were more complex than others. The singing crystals of Vega had taken 3 months to fully understand because they communicated through harmonic frequencies, rather than words. "There," Sarah said suddenly. "I think we've got it." The translated message appeared on the main screen, and Jake read it aloud. "To all inferior life forms in this sector, you are hereby commanded to surrender all territories and submit to the authority of the Zephyrian Imperium. Resistance will result in complete annihilation. You have 72 standard hours to comply." For a moment, the bridge was completely silent, then Ben started laughing. Ben Parker wiped tears from his eyes as he continued laughing. "Did they just threaten to destroy us? With what, space rocks?" The other crew members on the bridge began chuckling too. Dr. Lisa Campbell shook her head in amazement. "I've studied hundreds of alien cultures and I've never seen anything this backward. They actually think violence solves problems." Captain Jake Morrison tried to keep a straight face, but even he found the situation amusing. "Sarah, send this message to Earth Command. They'll want to see this." "Already done, Captain," Sarah Davis replied, still smiling. "I marked it as a cultural curiosity rather than a threat report. I mean, what else could it be?" The message traveled instantly through quantum communication networks, reaching Earth in seconds despite the vast distance. On Earth, it arrived at the Global Communication Center in Geneva, where night shift operator Kevin Martinez was drinking coffee and reading News from the Outer Colonies. Kevin nearly spit out his coffee when he read the alien message. He immediately forwarded it to his supervisor, along with a note that said, "You need to see this. Some aliens think they're living in the old days." Within an hour, the message had reached President Maya Rodriguez at her home in Mexico City. Maya was 55 years old and had spent her entire political career dealing with peaceful negotiations between human colonies and alien trading partners. She had never handled anything remotely resembling a military threat. Maya called an emergency meeting of the Planetary Council for the next morning. As representatives from around Earth gathered in the council chambers, many of them were still chuckling about the alien message. Council member Peter Johnson from the North American Federation couldn't stop shaking his head. "Surrender?" Peter said to his colleagues. "They want us to surrender? What does that even mean anymore?" Council member Angela Foster from the European Union pulled up historical records on her tablet. "I had to look it up. Apparently it means to give up and let someone else control you. People used to do this during wars, back when wars existed." The council chamber filled with the sound of confused laughter. These were serious politicians who dealt with complex issues like resource distribution and interstellar trade agreements. None of them had any experience with threats or military demands. President Rodriguez called the meeting to order and displayed the alien message on the main screen. "We've received this communication from a species calling themselves the Zephyrian Imperium. They seem to believe they can force us to obey them through violence." Council member David Chen from the Asian Cooperative raised his hand. "Have we tried explaining to them that we don't do violence anymore?" Maybe they don't understand our culture. That's a good point, Maya replied. Dr. Helen Murphy from the Xenocultural Studies Institute is joining us by video link to help us understand this situation. Dr. Murphy appeared on the screen from her office at Cambridge University. She was 70 years old and had spent her entire career studying alien psychology and cultural development. She looked genuinely puzzled as she read the Zephyrian message. "This is fascinating," Dr. Murphy said. "We're looking at a species that appears to be stuck in what we call the primitive aggression phase of development. Most species grow out of this within a few hundred years of achieving space travel." "So they're just really slow learners?" asked Council Member Lisa Turner from the African Alliance. "It seems so," Dr. Murphy replied. "They probably haven't discovered the economic and social benefits of cooperation yet. They're still thinking in terms of taking things from others instead of making things together." President Rodriguez nodded. "So we should treat this as an educational opportunity. We can help them understand how modern civilization works." Meanwhile, news of the alien threat was spreading across human space. On the colony world of New Brisbane, farmer Joe Wilson was tending his crops when his neighbor ran over with the news. "Joe, you've got to see this," his neighbor called out. "Some aliens from the galaxy's center want us to surrender to them." Joe stopped his harvesting robot and walked over. "Surrender what?" "Everything, apparently. They think they can just take over all our worlds." Joe scratched his head. "How would that even work? Do they understand how many people live in human space? We've got billions of people on hundreds of worlds. You can't just take over something that big." The news reached the mining station on Kepler 442b, where engineer Carol Stevens was overseeing the extraction of rare metals. When she heard about the alien demands, she called her crew together. "Everyone, we just got word that some aliens want us to surrender our mining rights to them," Carol announced to the 30 workers gathered in the station's main hall. The miners looked at each other in confusion. "Why would they want our mining rights?" asked Supervisor Mark Davis. "If they want rare metals, we can just sell them some. That's how trade works." "Maybe they don't understand economics," suggested technician Amy Clark. "Some species take longer to figure out that cooperation produces better results than conflict." Back on Earth, Admiral Chris Baker was having the strangest day of his career. Chris commanded the Olympus Gate Defense Station, which was designed to protect Earth from asteroids and cosmic debris. He had never expected to deal with hostile aliens. The defense station had powerful sensors and communication equipment, but its weapons were designed for destroying space rocks, not fighting other spacecraft. Chris was looking at tactical displays that showed huge alien ships approaching human space, and he had no idea what to do about them. "Sir, we're getting more detailed scans of the alien fleet," reported Lieutenant Commander Rachel Brown. "They have some serious firepower. These aren't exploration ships." Chris studied the readings. The alien vessels were massive, covered with what looked like weapon systems. They were built for war in a way that human ships hadn't been for thousands of years. "How many ships are we looking at?" Chris asked. "At least 200 large vessels, plus smaller support craft. Their technology seems advanced, but in a very different direction from ours. They've focused on destructive capability, while we've focused on productive capability." For the first time since receiving the alien message, Chris felt a small chill of concern. These aliens weren't just culturally backward. They had built a real military force, something humans had almost forgotten how to do. "Send a message to Earth Command," Chris ordered. "Tell them we might want to start taking this situation a little more seriously." The 72-hour deadline was approaching, and across human space, people were still laughing about the alien threat. But in a few government offices and military archives, some individuals were beginning to wonder if humanity's 3,000 years of peace had left them unprepared for something they had never expected to face again. The 72 hours passed quietly. Most humans had forgotten about the alien threat by the time the deadline arrived. On Earth, people went about their normal lives, working in laboratories, tending gardens, and teaching children. The idea that anyone would actually attack them seemed too ridiculous to worry about. Then the Kepler 442b mining station disappeared. Carol Stevens and her crew of 30 workers vanished in an instant. The station's last transmission was a confused message from Carol saying, "There are ships approaching. Really big ships. They're not responding to our greeting signals." After that, nothing. The quantum communication link went dead. Long range. Sensors showed only empty space where the mining station used to be. Admiral Chris Baker received the news at Olympus Gate and felt his stomach drop. He had been hoping the aliens were just making empty threats. Now he knew they were serious. "How long until the main alien fleet reaches our next outpost?" Chris asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Brown checked her displays. 18 hours until they reached the New Genesis colony. Population 400,000. Chris had never faced a military situation before, but he understood numbers. 400,000 people were about to face the same fate as the mining station if something didn't change quickly. "Send an emergency message to all human colonies," Chris ordered. "Tell them to evacuate immediately. Get everyone away from the outer systems and back toward Earth." The evacuation order caused panic throughout human space. Colony Governor Tom Wilson on New Genesis couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Evacuate the entire planet?" Tom asked during his emergency video call with Earth Command. "Where are we supposed to go? This is our home." "The alien fleet destroyed the Kepler mining station completely," explained Admiral Baker. "We don't know how to stop them. The only safe option is to get everyone away from the frontier." Tom looked around his office at the pictures of his colony's achievements. New Genesis had beautiful cities, productive farms, and happy families. The idea of abandoning everything seemed impossible. "How much time do we have?" Tom asked. "Maybe 16 hours. 400,000 people began the largest emergency evacuation in human history. Transport ships that normally carried cargo were hastily converted to carry passengers. Families grabbed whatever they could fit in small bags and headed for the spaceports. 8-year-old Emma Davis cried as her parents carried her aboard an evacuation ship. "Why do we have to leave? What about my friends?" Her father, Mike Davis, didn't know how to explain war to a child who had never heard of such a thing. "Some bad people are coming and we need to go somewhere safe until the grown-ups figure out how to make them stop." "Can't we just talk to them?" Emma asked. "Mom always says talking solves problems." Mike looked at his wife Sandra, who had tears in her eyes. "Sometimes talking doesn't work," Sandra said quietly. "Sometimes people don't want to listen." Meanwhile, on Earth, President Maya Rodriguez was holding another emergency council meeting. This time, nobody was laughing. "We need military advice," Maya announced to the assembled council members. "Does anyone know where we can find experts on warfare?" The council members looked at each other helplessly. Most of them had never even heard the word warfare until a few days ago. Council member Peter Johnson raised his hand. "There's a military history museum in Washington. Maybe they have information about how wars used to work." "A museum?" asked Council member Angela Foster. "You want to fight aliens with museum displays?" "It's the only place I can think of that might have answers," Peter replied. Within hours, Colonel Danny Wright found himself in the strangest situation of his career. Danny was 62 years old and had spent 40 years as the curator of the Smithsonian Military History Museum. His job was to preserve old weapons and explain ancient battles to schoolchildren who thought war was just a weird thing people used to do. Now the president of Earth was calling him directly. "Colonel Wright, we need your help," President Rodriguez said over the video link. "We're facing a military threat and we don't know how to respond." Danny stared at the screen in amazement. "A real military threat? Not just historical research?" "Very real. An alien species has destroyed one of our colonies and is threatening to destroy more. We need to learn how to fight back." Danny walked through his museum, looking at displays he had maintained for decades. Ancient tanks sat behind ropes and glass, their weapons empty and their engines cold. Fighter jets hung from the ceiling like sleeping birds. Nuclear weapons sat in sealed cases with warning labels about their destructive power. "Most of this equipment is thousands of years old," Danny told the president. "The technology is completely outdated. But the principles might still work, right?" Maya asked. "The basic ideas about how to fight?" Danny thought about all the books he had read, all the battles he had studied. The principles are still valid, but we'd need to adapt them to modern technology, and we'd need people who understand how to use them. Where do we find those people? Danny paused. We make them. Fast. Dr. Susan Clark, a military historian at Oxford University, got the call an hour later. Susan was 45 years old and had written 12 books about ancient warfare. She had never expected her academic research to become practical knowledge. They want me to teach modern people how to fight wars? Susan asked her department head in disbelief. Apparently so. The government is setting up emergency training programs. They need experts who understand military strategy. Susan looked at her office, filled with books about battles that happened thousands of years ago. Waterloo, Gettysburg, Stalingrad, the Third World War. Names that most people had forgotten. I study history, Susan said. I don't know how to actually fight. Then you better learn quickly, along with everyone else. Back in space, Captain Jake Morrison received new orders from Earth Command. The New Horizon was to return to Earth immediately and report to the Emergency Military Planning Committee. Military Planning Committee? Jake asked his crew. What's that? Dr. Lisa Campbell looked up from her workstation where she had been researching, the destroyed mining station. I think it means we're going to learn about war. Lieutenant Ben Parker, who had laughed at the alien threat just days before, wasn't laughing anymore. Captain, I've been reading about what happened to the mining station. The aliens didn't just destroy it. They completely vaporized it. There's not even debris left. Jake felt a chill. What kind of weapons can do that? The kind that humans haven't built in 3,000 years, Ben replied quietly. As the New Horizon turned toward Earth, Jake realized that humanity's long peace was over. The question now was whether they could remember how to be something other than peaceful before it was too late. On Earth, Colonel Danny Wright stood in his museum surrounded by government officials and military historians who were all trying to learn about war from books and displays. Outside, the first groups of refugees from the outer colonies were arriving, carrying stories of panic and loss. Danny looked at a display case containing an ancient military manual and wondered if 3,000 years of peace had left humanity too soft to fight back. He was about to find out. The transformation began in the deepest archives of human knowledge. Dr. Susan Clark stood in a room filled with military experts who had never expected to use their knowledge for anything except teaching history. Now they were drawing battle plans that would decide the fate of human civilization. The Zephyrians are using standard fleet tactics from what we call the expansion period of military development, Susan explained to the group of hastily assembled commanders. They move in large formations and try to overwhelm their enemies, with superior numbers and firepower. Engineer Tony Martinez listened carefully as he took notes. Tony normally designed peaceful space stations and colony habitats. Now he was learning to build weapons. So how do we beat someone with bigger guns and more ships? We don't fight them the way they expect, Susan replied. We use tactics they've never seen before. Human military history shows us that smaller forces can defeat larger ones if they're smarter and more flexible. Colonel Danny Wright opened an ancient tactical manual and pointed to a diagram. This is called guerrilla warfare. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, you hit them where they're weak and disappear before they can hit back. But these are space battles, protested newly promoted General Kate Sullivan. Kate had been a logistics coordinator for the Mars shipping routes until 3 days ago. How do you hide in space? You don't hide the ships, Danny explained. You hide your intentions. You make the enemy think you're going to do one thing, then you do something completely different. While the military experts studied ancient tactics, Tony Martinez was solving a more immediate problem. He stood in the engineering bay of the Luna shipyard staring at the peaceful cargo ship, Freedom's Dream. The ship belonged to Captain Ben Parker, who had volunteered his vessel for the war effort. We need to turn this into a warship without the Zephyrians noticing, Tony told his team of engineers. Can we hide weapons inside the cargo bays? Engineer Rachel Murphy examined the ship's design plans. We could replace the cargo containers with weapon pods. From the outside, it would still look like a normal trade ship. What about power? asked technician Carl Johnson. Weapons need a lot of energy. Tony smiled for the first time in days. That's the easy part. Our fusion reactors are thousands of times more powerful than anything humans used during the old wars. We can run weapons that would have needed an entire city's power supply. The work began immediately. Across human space, peaceful technology was being converted into tools of war. Dr. Rachel Murphy, the terraforming specialist, found herself adapting atmospheric processors into planet-scale defense systems. If we reverse the atmospheric conversion process, Rachel explained to her team, we can create electromagnetic pulses that will disable enemy ships in orbit. Won't that hurt our own people on the planet? Asked her assistant, Dr. Paul Anderson. Not if we shield the cities properly, Rachel replied. And it's better than letting the Zephyrians destroy everything. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison arrived, at Earth with the New Horizon. He was immediately assigned to work with Admiral Chris Baker at the Olympus Gate Station. Together, they were planning humanity's first military operation in 3,000 years. The Zephyrians will reach the Proxima Centauri system in 6 hours, Chris explained, pointing to a tactical display. They have 47 ships, including 12 heavy cruisers. Jake studied the alien fleet formation. They're traveling in a tight group. That makes them strong against frontal attacks, but it also makes them a single target. What do you mean? Jake remembered reading about ancient naval battles in Colonel Wright's museum files. If we can hit the center of their formation with something big enough, we can damage multiple ships at once. We don't have anything that powerful, Chris said. Yes, we do. Jake pulled up the specifications for a civilian asteroid mining laser. These lasers can cut through solid rock. What do you think they'll do to spaceship armor? Within hours, asteroid mining ships throughout the solar system were being retrofitted with targeting systems. The miners who operated these ships had spent years cutting up space rocks for raw materials. Now they were learning to cut up something else. Captain Steve Rogers piloted the mining ship Rock Cutter toward the edge of the solar system. Steve was 58 years old and had been mining asteroids for 30 years. He had never imagined using his equipment as a weapon. Target the lead Zephyrian ship, came the order from Admiral Baker. Wait for my signal. Steve watched his displays as the alien fleet approached. The Zephyrian ships were huge and covered with weapons that could destroy planets. But they were also moving in a predictable pattern, just like the asteroids Steve had been cutting apart for decades. Signal given. All mining ships, fire. 12 industrial mining lasers fired simultaneously. The beams were designed to slice through the hardest materials in space. The Zephyrian ships had never faced anything like them. The lead alien cruiser split in half. The ship behind it exploded when the laser beam punched through its reactor core. A third ship lost its weapon systems and began spinning out of control. In the Zephyrian command ship, Admiral Vex stared at his tactical displays in shock. 3 of his most powerful vessels had been destroyed in seconds by weapons he couldn't even detect properly. What kind of attack was that? Vex demanded of his tactical officer. Unknown, sir. The energy signatures don't match any military weapons in our database. Are they using some kind of new technology? No, sir. The energy patterns look like industrial equipment. Admiral Vex felt confused. These humans had just destroyed 3 warships using mining tools. What kind of species fought wars with construction equipment? Back on the Rock Cutter, Steve Rogers was reloading his laser systems. Admiral, we got 3 of them, the rest of the fleet is scattering. Good work, Captain Rogers. Phase 2 begins now. Phase 2 was Captain Ben Parker in the disguised Freedom's Dream. Ben approached the scattered Zephyrian ships while broadcasting on commercial trading frequencies. This is civilian freighter Freedom's Dream requesting safe passage, Ben announced, following the script he had memorized. We are carrying medical supplies to the Proxima colony. The Zephyrians saw what looked like a harmless cargo ship and ignored it. This was their mistake. When Ben got close enough, he opened his cargo bays. Instead of medical supplies, they contained guided missiles powered by fusion warheads. The missiles had been built using plans from the Military History Museum, but they were powered by technology that made them faster and more destructive than anything from the old wars. 2 more Zephyrian ships exploded. The rest of the alien fleet began retreating toward the edge of the system. "They're running," Admiral Baker announced over the communication network. "First engagement goes to humanity." But Admiral Vex was not finished. As his fleet retreated, he sent a message back to the Zephyrian Imperium. The message was simple. The humans are not what they appear to be. They fight like no species we have encountered. They use civilian technology as weapons and disguise warships as merchant vessels. Recommend immediate reinforcement of the invasion fleet. On Earth, President Maya Rodriguez received reports of humanity's first victory in 3,000 years, but she also received intelligence reports about Zephyrian communications. "They're calling for reinforcements," Dr. Helen Murphy warned during the emergency council meeting. This was just their advanced scout force. The main Zephyrian fleet has over 2,000 ships. Colonel Danny Wright stood before the council with a stack of ancient military manuals. "Then we better start remembering everything our ancestors knew about war. And we better do it fast." The peaceful species that had laughed at the alien threat was discovering something about themselves. They had not forgotten how to fight. They had simply chosen not to. Now that choice was being taken away from them, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had needed 3,000 years of peace to recover from what they used to be. The Zephyrian reinforcement fleet arrived 3 weeks later. 2,000 ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their weapons charged and ready for battle. Admiral Vex had convinced his superiors that humanity posed a serious threat, but even he was not prepared for what happened next. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, which had been converted into humanity's new flagship. Around him, displays showed the positions of every human ship, station, and defensive platform in the solar system. What the Zephyrians saw was a peaceful civilization with a few hundred lightly armed vessels. What they did not see was the trap that had been 3 weeks in the making. "Admiral Vex is hailing us," reported Communications Officer Sarah Davis. "He wants to discuss surrender terms." Jake smiled grimly. "Put him on screen." The Zephyrian admiral appeared on the main display. He was a tall reptilian creature with sharp teeth and cold eyes. Behind him, Jake could see the bridge of a massive warship bristling with weapons. "I am Admiral Vex of the Zephyrian Imperium," the alien announced. "You have impressed us with your resistance, but this ends now. Surrender immediately or face complete destruction." Jake looked around at his crew. Dr. Lisa Campbell nodded from her science station. Lieutenant Ben Parker gave him a thumbs up from tactical. These people had learned to fight in 3 weeks. They had remembered something their species had spent 3,000 years trying to forget. "Admiral Vex," Jake replied calmly. "We appreciate your offer, but we're going to have to decline." Vex's eyes narrowed. "You have a few hundred ships, we have 2,000. Your resistance is pointless." "Numbers aren't everything," Jake said. "We learned that from studying our own history. Would you like us to show you what we mean?" Before Vex could respond, Jake cut the transmission and turned to his crew. "Execute Operation Final Lesson." Across the solar system, humanity revealed what they had been building. Every asteroid mining station activated hidden weapon systems. Every space elevator became a massive railgun. Every peaceful research satellite deployed missile pods that had been disguised as scientific equipment. But the real surprise was the planets themselves. Dr. Rachel Murphy had spent 3 weeks converting terraforming equipment into planetary defense systems. Now she activated them all at once. Earth's atmosphere suddenly filled with electromagnetic energy that created a shield covering the entire planet. Mars did the same. Every human world became a fortress. "What is happening?" Admiral Vex demanded, as his sensors registered thousands of new weapon signatures appearing throughout the solar system. "Where did all these defenses come from?" His tactical officer studied the readings in amazement. "Sir, they've turned their entire civilization into a weapon. Every piece of civilian technology has been converted for military use." On Earth, President Maya Rodriguez watched the battle unfold from the Emergency Command Center. Beside her, Colonel Danny Wright monitored displays showing human forces throughout the galaxy. "The Zephyrians expected to fight a few hundred ships," Danny explained. "Instead, They're fighting an entire star system that's been turned into a weapon. The battle began with the mining lasers. Hundreds of them fired simultaneously from hidden positions throughout the asteroid belt. The beams converged on the Zephyrian fleet like a spiderweb of deadly light. 12 enemy ships were destroyed in the first volley, but this was just the beginning. Captain Ben Parker led a squadron of disguised cargo ships into the middle of the Zephyrian formation. Each ship looked harmless until it opened its cargo bays and released clouds of autonomous combat drones. These drones had been built using plans from ancient human archives, but they were powered by fusion cores that made them faster and deadlier than anything from the old wars. The drones swarmed through the Zephyrian fleet like angry insects. They were too small for the aliens' big weapons to target effectively, but they carried warheads powerful enough to cripple cruisers. Our point defense systems can't track them, reported Vex's tactical officer. They're moving too fast and there are too many of them. Admiral Vex watched his fleet being torn apart by tiny robots and converted mining equipment. How is this possible? Our intelligence said they were a peaceful species. They are peaceful, his science officer replied, studying the human tactics, but they weren't always peaceful. I'm reading their historical databases now. Admiral, these humans fought wars for 3,000 years before they stopped. They know every form of combat that has ever been invented. The revelation hit Vex like a physical blow. The Zephyrians had been expanding through the galaxy for centuries, conquering species that had never experienced serious warfare. Now they had attacked a species that had mastered war so completely they had voluntarily given it up. Fall back, Vex ordered. All ships retreat to the edge of the system, but there was nowhere to retreat to. Engineer Tony Martinez had been busy while the Zephyrians were positioning their fleet. He had converted the solar system's communication satellites into jump-point jammers. The Zephyrians were trapped. Admiral, Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication system. We'd like to have that conversation about surrender now. Vex stared at his displays. Half his fleet was destroyed or disabled. The rest were surrounded by human forces that seemed to multiply every time he looked. His sensors showed weapon systems hidden in places he had never imagined weapons could be placed. What are your terms? Vex asked quietly. Jake appeared on the main screen again. Behind him, Vex could see human crew members working calmly at their stations. They looked like scientists and explorers, not warriors. But they had just destroyed the most powerful fleet in Zephyrian history. Our terms are simple, Jake said. Stop attacking people. Join the Galactic Cooperative. Learn to build things, instead of destroying them. We'll help you if you want to learn. And if we refuse? Jake's expression didn't change. Then we'll show you what 3,000 years of warfare experience looks like when we're not trying to be nice about it. Doctor, Lisa Campbell stepped forward. Admiral Vex, we've been studying your species during this conflict. You have the intelligence to become great builders and scientists. You don't have to be conquerors. We can teach you better ways to live. Vex looked around his bridge at his surviving officers. They were all staring at him, waiting for his decision. The Zephyrian Imperium had never faced defeat before. They had no experience with surrender or negotiation. If we agree to your terms, Vex said slowly, what happens to our empire? You transform it, Jake replied. From an empire built on conquest to a civilization built on cooperation. It won't be easy, but it's possible. We know because we did it ourselves. 1 year later, Admiral Vex stood in the same conference room where President Maya Rodriguez had first laughed at the Zephyrian threat. Now he was signing the agreement that would make his species the newest members of the Galactic Cooperative. I still don't understand, Vex said to Jake Morrison, who had become humanity's ambassador to the former Zephyrian Imperium. Why did you stop fighting wars if you were so good at them? Jake looked out the window at Earth's peaceful cities and restored forests. Because we learned that winning wars isn't the same as winning peace. Anyone can destroy things. It takes real strength to build them. Dr. Lisa Campbell, now serving as director of the Zephyrian Integration Program, smiled as she watched former Zephyrian warriors learning to operate terraforming equipment. Besides, she added, Peace is much more fun when you choose it instead of having it forced on you. Colonel Danny Wright closed his military history books and returned them to the museum. The crisis was over. Humanity had remembered how to fight, used that knowledge to end a threat, and then chosen to return to peace. The galaxy was safe and the humans were still laughing. But now everyone understood why their laughter was so confident.